Nurse.org and Major League Sports teams are honoring nurses with discounted game tickets and once-in-a-lifetime experiences. From throwing the first pitch to riding the Zamboni to on-court recognition, join the fun. Visit nurse.org/nurse night to find a nurse appreciation event near you and grab your discounted tickets today. You're listening to Nurse Converse, presented by Nurse.org, a collaborative podcast amplifying diverse nurse voices. Get ready for a dose of inspiration, a sprinkle of education, and a whole lot of community.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another awesome episode of Nurse Converse, brought to you by Nurse.org. My name is Jeri Ford, and I'm so excited and honored to be co-hosting yet another awesome, jam-packed episode full of information that I definitely feel all of you will find very relatable. So if you listened to my first episode with Nurse Converse, you remember we talked about dating and relationships in nurses, and that got a lot of wonderful feedback. A lot of conversations were going based off of that episode. We talked about all the complexities that come along with that and being both healthcare and trying to date or trying to be in a relationship. If you haven't taken a listen, you definitely don't want to miss it, so go back and listen to that. Within that episode, there were many, many points that hit home with so many people that I got messages from, but one stood out way more than the others, and that was the topic of vicarious trauma and the way that that related to so many people. So that's what brought us here today. Although myself and other nurses are experts in experiencing vicarious trauma, but I am no expert by any means on how to handle it. So I brought in the same lovely guest from the last episode, Danielle Palomares. Danielle, can you give us another little intro about yourself?
Hi, Jeri. Yes, and I'm so excited to be here. I am a trauma, attachment, and sex therapist based in Pasadena, California. I specialize in all three of those subspecialties, and I work a lot with healthcare providers.
That's amazing. And that's actually the reason I found you in the first place, is because I was looking for someone who did both relationships, could help with that, and with healthcare workers. Yeah. And I know you're passionate about helping us and helping deal with all the things that the complexities that go into that. So I'm so excited to have you back.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And this is such an important topic.
And by the way, a little side note, I had a lot of responses from the last episode, but I also had so many people respond to in my messages and my friends saying that they loved the sound of your voice and that they feel like you could solve all of their life problems. And I thought that was
oh
really
my gosh, that is so funny. I blame it on my mic.
Yeah. Well, my mic's not doing that, so it's definitely something special about you for sure. So before we dive in, I want to read a quote from a book that you recommended on that last episode and to me personally in our side chats called Trauma Stewardship by Laura Vandernoot Lipsky. Hope I got that correct. I'm about halfway through the book. It's wild how much it resonates, but the first chapter was this quote that I had to put my book down and just let it marinate for a second because it was so good. So here's the quote. She said, "After so many years of hearing stories of abuse, death, tragic accidents, witnessing death and unhappiness, of seeing photos of crime scenes, missing children, deported loved ones, in other words, of bearing witness to others' suffering, I finally came to understand that my exposure to other people's trauma had changed me on a fundamental level. I had absorbed and accumulated trauma to the point that it had become a part of me and my view of the world had changed." Yeah. I mean, I read that and I was like, oh my, that was the first chapter. Yeah. I'm like, oh, okay.
Really
I'm
hits
sure
home.
I'm sure you being a therapist, that can relate to you too. And I'm like, I think that just this overall topic of what that means to bear witness to someone's pain every single day as a part of your career, how that does affect you long term. I think it resonated with so many people. That's why I'm so excited to delve into this.
Yeah, and it's a great quote to start.
Yeah, it's definitely highlighted and starred in my book right now. So
yeah.
So I guess first and foremost, what is vicarious trauma for anyone listening that has no idea what we're talking about?
Yeah. So vicarious trauma, it goes by several different names. We might hear it referred to slightly differently. Some people call it secondary trauma, trauma exposure responses. Also, empathetic drain or compassion fatigue are some other ways we might hear about it. And it's effectively the impact of bearing witness to other people's trauma and pain and hurt, right? We are mammals designed with mirror neurons to feel alongside other humans. And so when we do that over and over and over, and especially as part of our jobs, it has an impact. And stop.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I think that that's something not really, it's talked about that nurses are burnt out, and it's talked about that, different things like that, or that it's stressful or emotionally taxing. But I think like putting a label on it like that and really defining it like that, you're like, oh my gosh, yes, that's something we all experience.
Right. Well, and I think one of the hard things, and I do think there's value in naming this before we dive in, is that this is a difficult topic for healthcare providers to sit with. It is uncomfortable, I'll be honest, because most of the folks that show up in my office, there is some amount of protective distancing, minimizing. This can't happen to me. Oh no, I'm acclimatized to my job. It doesn't bother me to see people die day after day after day after day, or and there's a good reason why people come in with these narratives. And to be frank, maybe there are some people that are just completely unaffected. But most of the time, there are these impacts, and to admit them can feel very vulnerable. So I just want to name that and invite whoever's listening to maybe just be curious about how you're feeling as you listen to this podcast and what's coming up on the inside as you hear these ideas.
And I think probably once we get into next, this like the symptoms or what it looks like, I think maybe that could switch people's perspective a little bit too. And to be honest, when I read the book or started to, I thought maybe, I kind of deal with it pretty well. And then, first chapter, first thing, I'm like, whoa, okay, never mind. I guess I'll be reading this a little more intensely. So yeah, I think that just this is a good episode for us healthcare workers for sure. So I guess that we'll go into sort of what it looks like. How do nurses know what it looks like, or if they're experiencing it, or signs and symptoms?
Yeah. So to borrow from the author of the book, she says this really great quote, basically that we have a trauma exposure response, it's universal. This is a universal experience. So also taking away some of that shame and stigma, there are a lot of different ways that this can manifest. There's physical and cognitive and emotional symptoms. So interestingly, a lot of the healthcare providers that come to me, they start to talk about more of the physical pieces. It's this idea that like the body will rest you if you don't rest it or if you don't honor it. So a lot of chronic fatigue, a lot of like feeling kind of perpetually buzzy and on edge and unable to actually relax once your shift is over. Increased susceptibility to illnesses is a big one, maybe changes in appetite. I see your face there.
Well, I realized once I started this new job, and I think night shift was a part of it too. But now that I think about it, I'm like, yeah, I've definitely gotten like sick a lot more than I had before.
Right.
Working in the ICU compared to other times. So I'm like, that's interesting for sure.
Totally. Yeah. And then, it is hard, right? Like to tease out like what is causing which. So we have to look holistically at what someone is bringing in. And we'll talk perhaps later about also how other types of trauma that a nurse might be experiencing, things like racial trauma, things like coming in with complex trauma from childhood, right? Attachment trauma, that will only compound, what that they're experiencing in terms of vicarious trauma. But there's also cognitive symptoms. Some of the really big ones I see, especially from nurses, are dissociative moments and derealization. This can be really scary for nurses to admit, right? Because the thought of you not being locked in during your shift and kind of floating through and not being present is scary to admit out loud. But so many nurses that sit in front of me tell me, Danielle, I have no memory even of like even being on my shift. I was on autopilot the entire time, completely out of body. And that happens.
I've never like sat and thought about that. And I am like thinking of a handful of times, 100%, that I was just there, which is good. And that means we're good at our jobs, I guess. But
yeah,
not making mistakes and still being there, but not even really fully being in the moment, just trying to separate. I've definitely done that.
For sure. And then there's hypervigilance. Minimizing is a really big one. So minimizing your own experience or the experiences of your patients. Sometimes binary thinking can come up. So really starting to notice that we're having some struggles with embracing complexity and nuance. That's a really big one. And then a lot of deliberate avoidance. This isn't exhaustive, but just kind of listing off some of these core symptoms that I tend to see more in nurses too. A lot of deliberate avoidance.
I know another thing that they mentioned in the book too that I is definitely within, I think, these symptoms too. She gave an example of standing on, she was on a hike with, I believe, her dad, and she
Yeah.
was standing on a cliff, and it was like in a foreign country, and she started getting anxious because she realized, I'm on a cliff in a foreign country. I don't know what their healthcare system is like. If something happens to one of us, where will we go? And I
Mm-hmm.
didn't even realize that could be a symptom of this vicarious trauma, because I have done that. So I travel so much and I love it, but I have anxiety that I don't even speak out loud sometimes about, if I am somewhere remote or I am somewhere else, where do we go? If a medical emergency happens, if one of my friends has something happen or I have something happen. I went on a foreign trip with my mom, and I was so anxious about that because she's the person I love the most. And I'm like, if
Yeah.
something happens, where do I take her? And I'm like, that's crazy to think that. I'm sure some people have that anxieties too, but I think that that's definitely a direct impact of seeing all of the things that we see as nurses and healthcare workers in general.
Totally. And I think also in that passage, if I remember correctly, she also brings up this existential piece alongside those worries and anxieties, which we could categorize as like hypervigilance, right? Like kind of always being on guard and like waiting for the next danger, the next issue to kind of emerge. But that she was staring off the cliff and she started to like wonder about how many people had taken their own lives, right?
That's
Like this
that's right.
existential piece, constantly thinking about death, constantly thinking about this greater existential tug. And it's really hard, right? It steals the moments away from us because she also knew that she was supposed to, sort of everybody was standing around taking in like, wow, the wonder, the awe of this beautiful space. And she was thinking about death,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy, and I think that is a good example of when you can kind of realize and check in with yourself and just be like, "This is maybe something I need to work on or figure out." It's not healthy to live like that or just keep
Yeah.
going and think that it's just gonna get better, or you can just push it away maybe.
Totally. Yeah. We could file
Um,
that too under like rumination. That's a big one. So, a lot of healthcare workers tell me that they really struggle when their shift is over, when their service block is done, to not constantly check charts and to see about patient outcomes and to then think about the stories of the patients over and over and over again and ruminate. Yeah. And I'm clocking your
Guilty.
expression.
Guilty. I'm so guilty. We have a lot
Yeah.
of us nurses that try to check in with each other and be like, "How is so and so doing?" And it's like, I
Yeah.
know. And I'm like, "Wow, my gosh," I call them my babies, even though they're not my
Right.
babies, but that's what I call them. Like, after work, I'm like, "I wonder how my baby's doing."
Well, it's like partly it's like how human of you, Jerry, that you do care, right? But then we can also appreciate it's like a tightrope. It's like finding this balance so that it's not, tidal waving our actual personal life outside of work. And that's hard. It's hard to find that balance.
I know. I was thinking of some of the other symptoms, and I know behavioral too, like you were saying, withdrawing from others and friendships, and I guess,
Yes.
I know that happens a lot too as far as, like, in relationships and things like that, which I think we're gonna get into a little
Mhm.
bit later, but I didn't know any other signs or symptoms within that category that you could touch on a little
Yeah.
bit.
I mean, I do a lot of nurses, understandably, especially those that maybe, do per diem or have back to back or don't take many days off. They
Mhm.
talk to me about how they get off work and they don't want to socialize. They don't want to be around any of their friends. They're tapped out. So that's really tricky. And I certainly hard relate as someone that has a
Mhm.
very big caseload myself of therapy patients, that you get off and you've given so much energy to others, to other humans. So we'll talk more about this, but the importance of learning containment, learning how to fill your own cup back up, but then also being deliberate in engaging in community because too much withdrawal can actually be sapping in its own
Mhm.
way.
Yeah, I almost feel like me, and it's partly my personality. I'm just very extroverted, but I almost feel like I go the opposite way. I'm like,
Mm,
I almost feel like when I'm sitting alone and then I have to think about it. So I'd rather just be bopping all over the place. Like, sometimes I need to learn to say no, but
yeah.
yeah, I think that's probably part of it too.
Hey nurses, looking for exclusive discounts? Nurse.org has you covered with deals on everything. Save big on the essentials you need to excel in your career. Don't miss out. Visit nurse.org/discounts for the latest discounts made just for you.
We have these moments, and I can think of a specific moment just recently. Obviously, I've been a nurse for going on 13 years. So the amount of these moments where I've had that just feel surreal are endless.
Right.
But this more specifically, I remember somewhat recently, I for those that don't remember, I'm the pediatric ICU nurse. And there was a kiddo that came in, a very tragic, I don't want to say too much, but it was a very tragic incident. This kiddo didn't make it. She was 6, and it was a tragic accident, something that was she was completely fine that morning. The accident happened, and then, of course, not fine, and she did not make it, and it was on our shift. And I just remember I didn't have that patient, but I was next door,
Yeah.
and my patient didn't the parents had not spent the night, so it was just my little kiddo sleeping by herself. And I remember hearing the cries of the mom next door, and me myself had to go into my
Yeah.
other patient's room and cry, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh." So, I guess
Yeah.
my question is, or to help myself, of course, and all the other people listening, in the moment, what can
Right.
we do to protect ourselves, or even, like, balance between letting it out, but also I guess I don't know what I'm trying to say, but letting it out, but also not damaging ourselves further in that moment, because that was hard. I had to, like, step away and go into my other patient's room and
Of
cry. And
course.
luckily it was a baby, so she didn't know what was going on. But
Yeah.
um,
Well, yeah, I mean, so great question. And I just want to also like pit stop briefly to just honor like what you're sharing. And I can see as you
yeah,
touch on this story, even in this moment, I can see the ways that it's pulling up just
yeah,
emotionally for you and your
yeah,
empathy and your sense of connection to that
mm,
pain that that parent must have been, just slammed with, right? I mean, I can see it even right now. And I just want to stop there and
yeah.
say, like, how, again,
I
how
know,
human of you.
I know. I know, and it's funny too. Thinking about this podcast too, I always try to think of what my personal triggers are, and some things I'm able to sort of bypass where others aren't. But when it's like I've learned about myself, like a crying mom,
Oh,
and
yeah,
something that tragic is the one that, whoo, I just like, I just can't do it. Well, I
of
can. I
course.
got through it, but I'm like, oh my gosh, how do we do it in the moment? What are we supposed to do when we
Yeah.
realize something like this is happening?
Well, I mean, so a couple things. And I have a lot of thoughts swirling. I'll try my best to organize it
Okay.
because I'm also aware of like the systemic pressures to keep everything zipped up, right? And that
Right.
to be fair, I'm speaking from a position as a therapist, right? So my lens is going to look different than a nurse. And
Hmm.
what I would say is that there is a practice here. It is longitudinal, and cultivating these skills takes time. I want to just start with that. Like I wish we could throw some quick fixes but the truth is that there is a practice here. I really love specific to this situation, being present can be very helpful. Being present with your own experience, being present with the feelings of that you're hearing coming from the other room, but also being present as you went into that other room there you mentioned there was another child there.
Hmm.
So being able to then switch and be with, that child. That to me is one of the big tenets. We have to find ways to be present, which means we are going to be shifting moment to moment and allowing ourselves to move into the next place. The other piece to this is an idea of pendulation. And as a therapist, this is like my number one skill. I need to be truly empathetic. I need to be able to feel what my clients are feeling.
Hmm.
Otherwise, the therapy feels vapid.
Yeah.
I'm closed off. I'm stealing. I'm doing a performance. I need to be with it, but I
Mhm.
also am here as a professional to provide containment, attunement, and safety. And it is not safe for myself or my patient if I am flooded. So there's this pendulation, there's this beautiful dance of learning how to straddle what we call like the limbic system, the feeling parts
Mhm.
of the brain, maybe more of that right hemisphere, but also keeping that prefrontal cortex and the left part of the brain. It's almost like there's this taut balance. And if we allow ourselves to get hijacked in either direction, we risk numbing and being kind of too closed off and too zipped off and performative and not really empathetic, or we risk flooding and getting dysregulated. And so this is an art, all this to say. And it's
Right.
okay if anyone listening struggles with this because it's
Hmm.
hard.
Hmm. Yeah, because you want to balance. I mean, as a therapist, I've seen the difference when I've gone to a therapist who I can tell is not really like there. You can feel it. So I understand what, yeah, you can definitely tell a difference. And I feel like the same with nurses. I don't want to be a nurse that a family can tell is checked out or somewhere
Right.
else. I want to be there. That's why I'm doing this. But
For
yeah, at the
sure.
same time, I don't want to have it take a toll on me also,
For
or
sure.
more than it does.
Yeah. And so one of the things too is, and the book talks more about this idea of like developing stress resistance, becoming a stress resistant person. And that involves several other things. I don't know if we should get into it now or later, but things
Yeah,
like
let's
cultivating a
do it.
sense of agency, creating meaningful tasks outside, meaningful things that spark joy outside of the workplace. Like there's a lot of things we can start doing to build out a world that allows us to be a bit more resistant.
Yeah, I think we could get into that for sure, like the
Mhm.
stress resistance and more like skills on that. Because I know you. They talk about I was going to ask a little bit too about burnout, and I feel like that's kind of the same tips is to make sure your outside life is you have things going there too that can help balance the work part of it too.
Yeah, for sure. So some of the
Yeah.
things that I really work with a lot of my clients with is, of course, and I always say this like kind of with a smile because I've had many clients joke with me like, my last therapist told me to go outside and look at the sun. And like, so I also don't want to make a sound, like we hear the same things over and over, and I can understand some of these sound kind of trite, but there's truth in it. We have to look at healthy habits and lifestyle choices, which includes getting hard exercise, or joyful movement, if whatever feels good in your body, but
Mhm.
moving the body, really taking a curious stance at the use of stimulants and substances in your life because they can have a massive impact. And then really thinking critically about how we are resting. I think so many people think that doom scrolling and binging social media for hours and Netflix shows is restful, but the truth is when we start to critically look at those things, oftentimes they're actually more dysregulating. So thinking
Guilty.
about right.
Very
um
guilty on that.
I mean,
Especially the doom scrolling. Oh my gosh. I've like the amount of times I've like fallen asleep after a shift with like my phone on my face from
oh
like
yeah,
and TikTok like still running. I'm like, oh
yeah.
my God, I gotta like reel it back.
Yeah, it's numbing behaviors in a way. And there can be joyous parts of TikTok and like, you go on to see a cat video, but all of a sudden you're hit with something deeply disturbing, right?
Yes.
So it
Yeah.
can hijack you from that. So there's also I work with a lot of my clients too on like how to harness social media, how to create algorithms that support their like wellness. So anyway, another podcast for another day, but
Right.
but things like this, being really thoughtful and mindful as you look at your life. There's also this piece of community support and social resourcing. I do think that finding a way to connect with people that you care about and that care about you is so important. We can't heal in isolation. So there's that
Mhm.
piece as well.
Yeah, and I just want to throw out there too. I hear a couple times, and I know you have listed here like community support and being social. And I've heard a lot of times a lot of nurses just be like, I just don't love hanging out with other nurses outside of work. And I
Mhm.
understand that. I also feel that I almost feel the opposite. And I guess it's whatever works for you. I can't imagine having gotten through my career and through the hard moments without having a circle of other nurses
Yeah,
or without having someone to talk to. We are the only ones who know exactly what we're going through. So I can't even imagine. I feel like fostering it doesn't have to be the same people even on your unit if you don't want it to be. If you want to keep that
right.
balance or whatever you want to do, just I was a travel nurse for 10 years, and I feel like my group of travel nurses, my core, I wouldn't have gotten through this without them. I can't even imagine. Or my nursing school girls, I just can't. So I feel like
For
ima-
sure.
go- having that support group is as the only someone else who understands is crucial.
Yeah. And I think, again, speaking to this idea of
Mhm.
balance, having a balance of connections, having colleagues that get it is so important, as well as having friends that can introduce new stimuli, like new ideas and thoughts, right, that
Yes.
aren't in the field. So I think it's also just being mindful and cultivating a well rounded support system and network is important. But our society is so individualistic, and it really makes it difficult because a lot of these issues are relational and we need other people to help in part of our healing journey. We need to be in community with others. It's vital. And one other piece, Jeri, that I think is worth naming in this section is learning how, and this is a hard one, and I think you might see in our notes, I underlined it, I bolded, I made it really big, but it's this idea of developing a greater capacity to experience the full range of human emotions. And this one's really sticky because in our families of origin, our culture, the hospital systems we may be in, or the workplace environments, there are a lot of implicit messages that we learn about emotions, that there are some that are off limits. There are some that make us weak. There are some that make us bad even, or that are dangerous to experience. But the challenge is when we selectively try to repress and disown certain emotional experiences, we then are robbing ourselves of joy, of presence, of love, of connection, of all the other emotional experiences that are really important too. We can't just selectively numb. And so I think this is the big piece that I work with most of my clients on, is emotional assembly, is learning how to tolerate and really feel and be with certain emotional experiences.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of nurses are scared that if they feel that too much in the moment, then they'll just the waterworks will go.
Yes.
So it's probably, and same for me. I feel like, I had to step away in that example, but in the moment sometimes too, and I'm just pushing it back. I'm like, oh, if I let myself feel right now, I'm going to be feeling.
Right. And
it's going to be.
Totally. And to put an asterisk on this, I think it sounds like you were very intuitive and wise in how to handle that specific situation. Like you knew, if you can feel that feeling where I'm going to go over the edge and it's going to hijack my body.
Yes.
So in therapy, we do this work very slowly. As a trauma therapist, especially, we're going to move very slowly into this.
Right. So this is something that I really, really wish that nursing school, if this talk about such a slow process, I really wish with all of my heart that this is something they touched on in nursing school. Do you feel like that could be valuable, of teaching how? I don't remember learning about how to take care of ourselves emotionally in nursing school at all. Then again, I went 15 years ago, but yeah, I feel like there could be some value in that for sure. And maybe, I don't know, generations are changing, so maybe Gen Z could work all that for us, because I feel like that's so important.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that this is, for what it's worth, I don't think this is just nurses. I do think that there are, just culturally, we're taught so many messages about, disowning certain emotional experiences, mental health. There's so much stigma. But I think things are turning. I think I'm noticing a huge cultural shift, which is exciting.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can work on that for sure. When you're experiencing it, but you still need to be, we talked about sort of in the moment and at work, but when you just need to be a productive person or get things done, do you have where can we start as far as figuring that out once we're feeling these things?
Yeah. So, I mean, for anybody that's listening, especially those who are new to the field, I would just say, number one, it's prevention, right? It's this adage of, once you're already thirsty, it's likely a sign you're dehydrated. It's very similar. If you're already noticing some of these symptoms, that's a cue that we got to start addressing this and not kicking it down. Because the challenge is, if we keep pushing it off and pushing it off, it will eventually get to you. It can cause breakdowns. You're going to have to take a leave, and so we want to avoid that. If you're already noticing symptoms, I would really strongly suggest, if you have the capacity, if you have the resources, to seek support, to get actual support from a therapist in learning some of these more nuanced skills, because our jobs are nuanced, right? We have to cultivate a certain skill set that you named is not taught in nursing school. Aside from that, the biggest thing would be starting to try to make the unconscious conscious, developing intentionality in our day-to-day behaviors and our movements, and really learning how to self-attune and how to develop self-awareness. Those are kind of the core pillars of the work. And this can be done on your own. I just think that it's more effective when we have someone to support us in it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I hope this episode resonated with all of you the way it did with me, and this topic in general. And I hope you learned something helpful. Danielle, thank you so much once again for your amazing insight and your help. You're making such a difference between the last episode and this episode and every nurse listening to this. So we really appreciate that. Where can they find you if they want to talk more to you?
Thank you, Jeri. So they can find me at my website, DaniellePalomares.com. I'm also on Instagram, Danielle Palomares MFT. And yeah, I'm so appreciative that you asked me to come back on again. And it's such an honor. And I have so much respect and appreciation for what you do, what you all do in this field. It's a really noble path and a hard one. And I see you all in it.
And then I am Jeri Ford, and you can find me at JeriLynn_89 on Instagram. You can also find other ways to contact me on the Nurse.org website on my little page on there. And please take a moment to rate this podcast if you haven't, or write a review. Leave a comment if you love this episode and if it resonated with you. And take care, everybody, and take care of yourself. Thank you. And thank you again, Danielle.
Thanks for joining Nurse Converse, brought to you by Nurse.org. Help us grow by leaving a 5-star rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. Nurse.org supports nurses with career and education tips, life advice, and breaking news. Thank you for all you do and for being you.